I have played Balatro for over 100 hours, and I don't even really like the game. I have always had a weird relationship with roguelikes. Ever since they became well known in the indie game scene, I've been playing them. Heck, the first video of this channel was supposed to be about roguelikes. But I've also found that most of the mainstream roguelikes don't click with me that much, except for a few. I didn't really like Dead Cells, Don't Starve, Risk of Rain 2, even if they're great games. For a while, I pretty much only played more niche roguelikes like Death Road to Canada or Evercrawl, which is actually one of the best mobile games ever, please play it. Until Balatro. Balatro is a deck building poker roguelike about, you know what Balatro is. You're not stupid. You little trickster. Might even be a joker, if I do say so myself. Saying that the game got popular would be an understatement. The game got popular enough to basically redefine what a roguelike even is. Everybody played it. Even if it was already well defined, Balatro managed to make the roguelike genre well known to the general public. So much so that people wanted more, and indie devs delivered. Balatro's main gameplay has an extremely simple loop. It alternates between a playing phase and a shop phase. In the playing phase, you play cards, score points, and get money. In the latter, you spend your cash and buy jokers, which help you score more points and therefore continue the loop. This framework can work in a lot of other turn-based roguelikes. For example, take Nobby's Number Factory. In this game, you launch Nobby to score points, collect items, and yada yada. The game alternates, like Balatro, between a shop and a main gameplay phase. However, it differs in its approach in two ways. First off, you have to play 5 rounds before accessing the shop, compared to Balatro, which has won every round. The second change is the ability to overscore. In Balatro, whether you get Nan Inf or 300, you will pass the first blind. Going over the score limit doesn't matter in the game, compared to Nobby, which makes the mechanic of overscoring essential to keep your economy up. Overscoring in Nobbies fills up this meter and gives you more money and lives. Balatro does this instead with the interest mechanic, forcing you to keep money in order to get more money. Both of these game loops have the goal of making you take tough decisions, which is, in my opinion, one of the reasons why both games got as popular as they did. Do I buy this joker, or do I keep my money to get interest? Do I get the black market key, or hope for a better perk? While I believe that this mechanic is one of Balatro's biggest strengths, I can't deny that this isn't the reason why people play Balatro. The reason they play Balatro is because of this. The infinitely scoring combinations, the sounds that trigger the insides of your tiny lizard brain, the neuron activation of it all. This is also why Balatro's most popular mod is scripted, a mod that makes the original game way more extreme, both in its difficulty and easiness to pick up. But where do we draw the line between difficulty and fun? The reason why Balatro's late game and chip exploding phase feels so great is because it's difficult to get there, but I think this shows a bigger problem with Balatro's main gameplay. Like I said earlier, Balatro is a game that is rewarding because of its learning curve, but you're still at the mercy of RNG. A bad first turn or two can still kick you in the balls and send you to square one. No matter your technical skill in playing poker hands, discard, money management, jokers, you will suck at the game one round or another. Even if pro Balatro players show that you can still win the game with any seed, it's still incredibly difficult to do so, and one wrong mistake can still make you lose the game, which makes the game a lot more punishing and frustrating at times. This isn't an issue unique to Balatro, as it is present in other roguelikes. The thing that makes it stand out for me in the game is the fact that you have to beat the game 120 times, plus the challenges, just to get the second hardest completionist achievement. For what? What does this card-shaped rabbit hole lead to? What does Balatro even mean? I have an ungodly amount of time spent in Cookie Clicker. Mostly while idling, but still. I have almost 100%ed the game, but there is still one of the hardest achievements that remains. And a little bit extra. This achievement requires you to get 1 trivigintillion cookies. For context, this is 1 followed by 72 zeros. This number is unbelievably big. But how do you get to it? You can get to a few septendecillions per second, but only idling with this method would take billions of years to achieve the trivigintillion. The difficulty curve of Cookie Clicker is fairly weird. You start off by needing to actively play, clicking the cookie, buying buildings, getting golden cookies, popping wrinklers, normal stuff. But once you start ascending, trying to complete the minigames, you don't need to worry about your cookie production anymore. But as you get closer and closer to reaching the end, you need to stop doing nothing. You need to act. The player needs to make what are called combos, combining effects in order to get an insane amount of cookies. You may have done this without thinking in the early game, by combining Clicker Frenzy and Frenzy. But in the end game, these simple combos stop working. You need more. You can't just sit back and watch. You need to get involved with the game's systems in order to break it in half. I won't go in depth about everything, but if you're at all interested in Cookie Clicker or math, I strongly suggest that you take a look at how these combos work. Once you add Crumbler, the Garden, Sugar Lumps, Saves Coming, external tools, the Temple, and so much more, the game becomes about micromanaging every single aspect of it. Satirizes itself by not being about the thing it's called. The learning curve of the game is about unlearning its core concept of idling and not actually playing the game. It's the thing other clicker games don't understand. Cookie Clicker popularized the clicker genre, even if it already was popular, because it's the only one that is self-aware at its core, which other clicker games that try to replicate its success miss the whole point of. But what does this lead to? Yes, the game is a criticism of the idle genre, but it defined that genre. It created the monster it's making fun of. Is Cookie Clicker good art? Are video games art? I feel like video games have always been weird in the art space. Just look at the best-selling video games. Almost all of them aren't played for their stories or meaning. They're a product, meant to be enjoyed with barely any thoughts. But they are art. They do have meaning behind them. The problem is that this meaning is obscured by the gameplay. When you make the thing you criticize actively entertaining, that's the meaning most people remember. That shooting the bad guy was fun. That violence is good, actually. And I think this is the biggest problem with treating video games as an art form. This is the reason why I don't find a lot of enjoyment in the AAA or popular gaming sphere. They try to balance the story they're trying to tell with a fun gameplay loop, which is often shoot, loot, repeat. Or they just ignore the story altogether. But if a game doesn't say anything, is it worth anything? Okay, I swear I have a point. Ao Oni is an RPG Maker horror game that had its first public version released in October 2008, having dozens of other versions and sequels made. It was one of the first horror games to become popular in the Let's Play era of YouTube. It has gained a small following in Japan and an even smaller one in the rest of the world. After the first game released, it got the Japan treatment of getting way too many spin-offs and adaptations. The thing is, Ao Oni sucks. It very much isn't a good game. The story doesn't lead anywhere, the characters are one-dimensional, the titled Ao Oni isn't scary at all, and the game looks pretty bland. The only good part of the game are the puzzles, which even then aren't amazing. But for some reason, I really love this game. I can still find a sort of charm within it, even if I know the main game kind of sucks. The RPG Maker aesthetic has always fascinated me. I really like the look of Ao Oni. The mix between the default RPG Maker assets and the fairly uncanny Oni create a very unique style to the game, even if it doesn't stand out without the Oni. Actually, let's talk about them. Its design was made by the creator of the game, who was very inexperienced with graphic design, as you can see. But I think this design is actually pretty great. Its amateurish nature creates a really unique design that I can't see being made in anything else. The Oni isn't good at creating a scary atmosphere, but the game still creates its own in other ways. The whole experience is filled with memorable moments, but the one I remember the most is when you escape the main mansion to go to the old house besides it, the last zone of the game. There is a brief moment between these two zones, where you're walking under the rain, grassy fields beside you. You know the journey is nearing its end. You're not safe for now, but you can take the moment to breathe a little. I find this moment quite beautiful, actually, and I think that was the intention. Ao Oni doesn't really say anything. It doesn't really have a theme it delves into, nor a message of any sort. So, is it art? Yes. Yes, it is. The game doesn't make the player reflect, but they can still get involved and be changed by its story, visuals and character. Ao Oni created a community and fans. It made people feel, even if it was unintentional. It's still worth something. So then why the fuck are video games considered a lesser art form? From the very beginning of video game history, video games have always been seen as entertainment first, not as an art form. The first publicly available arcade machine was Pong, which was made to take the player's money away and offer them a fun time for a few minutes. In the first few decades of video games existing, not a lot of games had a dedicated story. Microcomputer role-playing games had more freedom to implement one, but it still wasn't the common practice. It was only in the later third and early fourth generation of consoles that plot was a lot more important. Games like Earthbound and Chrono Trigger and other text-based games have proven that video games can have an interesting story. But these games all have something in common. The biggest part of their story is contained in a text format, not in interactivity, gaming's primary medium of expression. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I think it's interesting to see how interactivity isn't used as much to tell a story. In the essay, Video Games Are Art, They're Just Bad at It, by Henry Julie, they talk about how other mediums use contemplativeness to tell their stories, and let time for the audience to wonder and analyze the art form through, whereas video games need you to interact with them to progress, breaking the contemplative nature that other art forms have. When I say contemplative, I'm talking about when you watch a piece of art. You're looking at it how it was meant to be interacted with, without having any input on how the art ends or progresses. It's like how you, the viewer, is watching this video right now. You're watching me talk without being able to change what I'm saying or being involved in what I will say next. Back to what I was saying, it's a really interesting essay that I took a lot of inspiration from in this video. Games not being as contemplative as other mediums isn't a bad thing, but it's the reason why you can't treat video games the same as movies or books, since you have to separate the contemplative parts, like cutscenes or dialogue, with the interactive parts, gameplay and choices. But are there any games that merges those two concepts well? Hotline Miami was one of the most influential games in the indie boom of the early 2010s, and is still very much relevant today. The game is all about shooting and killing, and is an actual criticism of violence in the video game sphere. However, its main story beats still happen in dialogues and cutscenes. So why am I using it as an example? Because Hotline Miami gets it. Hotline Miami is a fairly simple game. You get in the building, kill the mobsters, and sometimes do some sort of side quests. After finishing the level, you have to walk back to your car the same way you came through. But the massacre you did is still there. You see those people you killed. The music has stopped. You're alone with your thoughts. This is nearly always the most impactful moment of a level. The quiet walk of shame. The walk of the murderer. Hotline Miami also loves to kill off its characters, and one of the most memorable moments of this is when you face off Biker in the first entry. It's a draining duel between you and him. Both killers, both killed. The story branches in two ways after this, the Biker route and the Jacket route. The first is where Jacket died, and the second one where Biker died. The thing is, in both scenarios, you have to fight the other one. You're playing your own death. This makes the player way more involved with the story as it contradicts itself. They have to pick a side they believe in, while knowing full well that both sides are possible, having played through both of them. These two events couldn't be achieved in any other way than interactivity, as the player needs to attach themselves to the characters, in this case by playing them, to truly be able to experience these parts of the game without entirely relying on contemplative media like the dialogue. It makes for an even more powerful game, recontextualizing the player's actions through the same medium they committed them with. I could end the video here. I did my job. I proved why video games are art, why they're not like the other forms of art, and why interactiveness can be implemented really well to transfer a message. So why the fuck does Balatro exist? When Nintendo released the NES in 1985 in the US, it was marketed as a toy, and as most toys, it was heavily gendered. It was made to cater to boys. This established a market mainly dominated by, at least in Wii-produced games, men. Games like Contra, Streets of Rage, and Doom were focused on doing manly things like killing people. But these games influenced other games, who influenced other games, and who influenced the games we have now. Video game making culture is in an endless state of inspiration, but it was first influenced by the simple idea of selling toys to boys. This choice was a trigger that made nearly all of the modern mainstream gaming about shooting people, or creatures, or violence in general. Call of Duty, Pokemon, Minecraft, Stardew Valley, all of these involve violence in some way, inherited from other mainstream titles before becoming mainstream themselves. This created a medium based on masculinity and a framework for what a video game should be. The problem is that when you're trying to convey a story through this medium of interactivity, it's hard to break out of the mold of what has already been established. There's only a few games that I can think of that truly redefined, to me at least, how a video game could be structured. This is why most video games have always been fun first, art second. But it's also why it's so hard to make art through games. This art form, being born from inside of capitalism with an inherent profit incentive, unlike when people first painted or wrote, created an environment where retention and popularity was key, unlike other forms of art that can sustain themselves in smaller communities. At least in the first few decades of gaming. Then came indie games. In the late 2000s and early 2010s, with the rapid advancement of the internet and online shops like Steam and WiiWare, independent games could finally take the spotlight and become popular. They seemed like a way to finally break video games out of their fun-first mentality. The problem was that these games took inspiration from already established standards and frameworks, even if they changed a lot of the fundamentals. Especially in roguelike design, where the gameplay always needed to be fun, and where there wasn't a lot of room for an engaging story, where you always needed to replay a run, where you needed to get a higher score than the last run. The framework where Balatro was born. Balatro is the end product of more than half a century of game making, the result of the indie scene taking over. It's incredible that games like this even exist today, but this begs the question, is Balatro a good game? It falls into every roguelike tradition, a shop like every other roguelike games before it, and the same fun first mentality. Well, yes, of course Balatro is a good game, no shit. Climbing up your run with jokers is fun, the decision making is still brilliant, but my point still stands. It's just a roguelike. So why did Balatro nearly win Game of the Year, get so much acclaim, and all of this? Because it perfected the roguelike formula by making its gameplay accessible, in-depth, always possible to win, as shown by the best Balatro players, but most importantly, it's fun and addicting. The ideas Balatro is built around are made for fun, not for telling any kind of story, or bringing themes. It is pointless in its design, but it also proved that it's not necessarily a bad thing. It checked all those boxes and was made just for fun and nothing more. It didn't try to go deeper, which is why you can't really dislike the game. It's also one of the most stereotypical representation of indie games, because it is the most digestible. It is made by mostly one guy who was passionate about his craft and just wanted to make a game. But the problem is that it sets a standard for other indie games, that they should just be made to be fun, just like other games. Not groundbreaking, not different, just like those same old games you like. This still shows games as a worse form of art, only made to be entertaining. To be clear, this is not something caused by Balatro, but rather the environment it's present in. But I think this game is an interesting case of that, as it shows that one of the only way to make a widely acclaimed game that no one hates is by making it just fun. My point is, we need to reinvent how we interact with the medium of games, but most importantly, the medium of interactivity. We need to make games that redefine what a game is, and support those games. However, we can still recognize how games made for fun are still art, and are still important and valuable. Balatro is incredibly interactive, even if it's not artistic in the traditional sense. But it's still a game that already gave devs inspiration for their work. And that's awesome. We need to continue to do that. But we also need to create artistic games that don't necessarily follow what has been done. Because a lot of games that try to include themes and messages often fail by also trying to be a fun video game. This also goes to the audience too. Try to be more open to artistic games by going on itch.io or the depths of Steam to find some weird gem of a game that connects with you deeply. Or you can start making games too.